Ella Fitzgerald sat in the grand ballroom of the Beverly Hilton Hotel on May 4, 1959, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. This was the first Grammy Awards ceremony, the music industry's new attempt at creating something equivalent to the Oscars, and Ella was nominated in 5 categories. 5. She'd spent the previous week trying not to think about it. Every time someone mentioned the nominations, she'd change the subject. Virginia Williams, her assistant and closest confidant, had finally confronted her 2 days before the ceremony. "You're terrified," Virginia had said bluntly. "Because I can't control it," Ella had admitted. "When I perform, I know what I'm doing, but this, other people deciding if I'm good enough, that's different." "You are good enough," Virginia had said firmly. 5 nominations, Ella, do you understand how significant that is? Now, seated at her table with the formal dinner finished but barely touched, Ella felt that same anxiety twisting inside her. "If I win even one," she'd whispered to Virginia before the ceremony officially started, "it'll be a miracle." Virginia squeezed her hand. "You deserve all of them." But deserving and winning were different things. The competition was fierce. Frank Sinatra, Peggy Lee, Doris, Nat King Cole, legends, all of them. And this was the inaugural ceremony. Nobody knew how the Recording Academy would vote, what they'd value, or who they'd choose to celebrate in this first-ever recognition of musical excellence. Ella was 41 years old. She'd been performing professionally for 25 years, since that terrifying night at the Apollo Theater in Harlem when she'd frozen trying to dance and sang instead. The Songbook series had transformed her from a respected jazz singer into something bigger, but 5 nominations at the first Grammy ceremony felt almost excessive. Surely the Academy would spread the awards around. Surely they wouldn't give multiple Grammys to one person on this historic night. This is the story of what happened over the next 3 hours, of Ella's name being called over and over in a way that seemed impossible. Of a woman who expected nothing walking away with everything. And of the moment the music industry recognized what people had known for decades. Ella Fitzgerald wasn't just great, she was in a category entirely her own. The Beverly Hilton ballroom was magnificent, crystal chandeliers, elegant tables, an air of historic importance. Ella sat with Virginia, Norman Granz her manager, and musicians she'd worked with over the years. The room buzzed with speculation about who might win. "Nervous?" Norman asked. "Terrified," Ella admitted. "I've performed for presidents, but this feels different. Performance is what I control. This is other people judging me." The ceremony began with speeches about recognizing musical excellence, about creating a lasting institution. Then they started announcing categories. Ella's first nomination was Best Female Vocal Performance, Single. Her recording from the Irving Berlin Songbook was up against Peggy Lee, Doris Day, and Kay Starr, all formidable vocalists with strong recordings that year. When the presenter walked to the podium, Ella felt her heart hammering. This was it, the first award, the one that would either validate her work or remind her that being nominated was achievement enough. Presenter opened the envelope, paused for dramatic effect, and the Grammy goes to Ella Fitzgerald. For a moment, Ella genuinely thought she'd misheard. The name couldn't have been hers, but then Virginia was grabbing her arm, shaking it. Ella, you won. Get up there." She stood shakily, making her way through tables of applauding musicians to the stage. When she accepted the Grammy, the weight of it surprised her, heavier than she'd expected, the golden gramophone reflecting stage lights brilliantly. She stepped to the microphone, looked out at hundreds of faces, realized she'd prepared absolutely nothing to say. Thank you," she managed. "This is such an honor. Thank you to the Recording Academy. I truly didn't expect this." It was brief, stammering, probably inadequate, but it was genuine. She returned to her table in a daze, carefully setting down her first Grammy, thinking, "Well, that's incredible. That's enough. I won one." But the night was just beginning. 30 minutes later, after 2 other categories had been announced, they reached Best Jazz Performance Soloist. Ella's Duke Ellington Songbook was nominated against some of the greatest jazz instrumentalists alive. Dizzy Gillespie on trumpet, Stan Getz on saxophone, and several other performers who defined modern jazz. When they announced the nominees, Ella barely listened. She'd already won once. That was her miracle for the night. Ella Fitzgerald. Virginia grabbed her arm so hard it hurt. Again, Ella again. Ella sat frozen, genuinely unable to process what she'd heard. Norman had to lean over. "Ella, you need to get up. You won again." This time when she walked to the stage, the applause was different. louder, mixed with laughter, not mocking but delighted, because people were starting to realize something unusual was happening. 2 Grammys for one artist at the very first ceremony. That wasn't just success, that was the Academy making a statement. "I can't believe this is happening," Ella said into the microphone, her voice cracking slightly. "Thank you, again, I'm running out of words." The audience laughed warmly. There was an affection in the room now, a collective appreciation for witnessing someone genuinely overwhelmed. She returned to her table, now needing Virginia's help because she was holding 2 Grammys. Other musicians at nearby tables were leaning over to congratulate her. Dizzy Gillespie, who'd lost in the category she just won, stood up and saluted her with his drink. "2," Ella kept repeating. "2 Grammys, this is insane, this has to be it." But 20 minutes later, Best Vocal Performance Album Female, the Irving Berlin Songbook against strong competition from other female vocalists. By now, people at surrounding tables were watching Ella's table specifically, waiting to see her reaction. The presenter opened the envelope, looked genuinely surprised, couldn't help smiling. For the 3rd time tonight, Ella Fitzgerald. The ballroom burst into even bigger applause, mixed with open laughter now, because this was becoming something extraordinary. 3 Grammys for one artist. At the inaugural ceremony, the Recording Academy wasn't just recognizing excellence, they were declaring it definitively. Ella walked to the stage for the 3rd time. And she was laughing too, laughing and crying simultaneously, overwhelmed by the impossibility of what was happening. "I don't know what to say that I haven't already said twice tonight," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I promise I'm as surprised as you are, more surprised, probably." The audience loved it, the humility, the genuine shock. This wasn't an artist who'd expected to sweep. This was someone discovering in real time that the industry valued her work more than she dared to imagine. Back at her table, Ella now had 3 Grammys lined up like soldiers. They took up significant space, gleaming under the ballroom lights. She kept touching them compulsively, making sure they were real. "There are 2 more categories you're nominated in," Virginia reminded her gently, though her voice was shaking with excitement. "I can't win all 5, Ella said firmly. "That would be ridiculous, unprecedented. They'll give the others to someone else. They have to." Norman was looking at the program, reading the next category's nominees. "Ella, look who you're up against. Best Performance by a Pop Single Artist." Ella's work was nominated alongside Perry Como, whose smooth baritone had made him a television star. Frank Sinatra, who'd been the king of popular music for over a decade. Dean Martin, whose casual charm had won him millions of fans. These were giants, not just of music, but of American entertainment. The category was announced. The nominees were read. At Ella's name, several tables erupted in applause before the winner was even announced, people rooting for the pattern to continue. The presenter opened the envelope, looked out at audience with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen, Ella Fitzgerald." The ballroom exploded, not just applause anymore, actual cheering, musicians standing up, tables pounding in appreciation. Because this wasn't just about Ella winning anymore, this was about witnessing something historic. The Recording Academy, in its very first ceremony, was making an unambiguous statement. This is the standard. This is excellence. Ella couldn't move for a moment. Her hands were shaking. Virginia was crying openly now. Norman stood up, pulled out Ella's chair, helped her to her feet because her legs had gone weak. The walk to the stage felt endless. Ella was crying now too, not sad tears, but completely overwhelmed ones, grateful tears. Musicians she'd known for decades were standing and applauding as she passed their tables. Perry Como, who'd just lost to her, was on his feet, clapping enthusiastically. "I don't have words anymore," she said into the microphone, her voice breaking. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but thank you. Thank you to everyone who believed in this music." The applause continued as she walked off stage, and this time when she got back to her table, she couldn't sit down. She just stood there, staring at 4 golden gramophone statues. Frank Sinatra came over between categories, kissed her cheek, whispered, "Nobody deserves this more than you, kid. Enjoy every second." Peggy Lee stopped by their table. "Congratulations, Ella. This is your night. Just beautiful." Even competitors were celebrating her. The industry had collectively decided that tonight belonged to Ella Fitzgerald. "One more category," Norman said quietly. "Album of the Year, the biggest award of the night, the final recognition." Ella's Irving Berlin Songbook was nominated alongside albums that had dominated popular music. Henry Mancini's sophisticated jazz arrangements, Frank Sinatra's deeply personal concept album, the Kingston Trio's folk phenomenon. I can't win this one, Ella whispered. 4 is already impossible. 5 would be. I don't even know what it would be. Historic, Norman said simply, his voice reverent. The ceremony was winding down. Album of the Year was always the final award. The room had a crackling, electric quality now, everyone acutely aware that Ella had won 4 Grammys already, wondering if the Academy would actually complete the sweep. The presenter for this final award was Nat King Cole, himself one of the most successful and respected recording artists in America. His smooth baritone had broken racial barriers, his elegance forcing audiences to see him as an artist rather than just a black performer. When he walked to the podium, the room fell completely silent. This has been quite an evening, Nat said, his voice warm. We've seen the Recording Academy recognize excellence in all its forms, and now, for our final award, Album of the Year. He read the nominees slowly. When he said Ella's name, the applause was immediate and sustained. Nat opened the envelope, read the name, and his smile was radiant. Ladies and gentlemen, the very first Album of the Year Grammy goes to Ella Fitzgerald and her Irving Berlin Songbook. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. Every single person in that ballroom rose to their feet. Musicians who'd competed against her, producers who'd worked with her, industry executives who'd sometimes underestimated her, all standing applauding this unprecedented moment. Ella couldn't move at first. She was crying too hard, her whole body shaking. 5 Grammys. She'd won all 5 categories she'd been nominated in at the first Grammy Awards ceremony. A perfect sweep so complete it seemed impossible. Virginia and Norman both stood, helped Ella to her feet. Norman handed her a handkerchief for her tears. Virginia whispered, "You did it. You actually did it." The walk to the stage felt like moving through water. Time had become strange. When she reached the stage, Nat King Cole was there, holding the Grammy. He handed it to her and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Nobody deserves this more," he whispered in her ear. Loud enough only for her to hear, Ella stood at the microphone, looking out at a ballroom full of standing, applauding music industry professionals. She was holding her 5th Grammy of the night. The number felt absurd, impossible, real. For a long moment she couldn't speak, just stood there letting the moment wash over her, trying to memorize every detail. Finally, she managed words. "I started singing at the Apollo Theater in Harlem when I was 17 years old. I was homeless, I was terrified. I planned to dance, but my feet froze, so I sang instead. I won $25 that night, and it was the most money I'd ever had." She paused, composing herself as tears continued to fall. "And tonight, 25 years later, I'm standing here holding 5 Grammys. If that 17-year-old girl could see this." Her voice broke completely. She stood there crying, unable to continue. The applause swelled again, supportive, celebratory, a room full of people letting her know it was okay to be overwhelmed. When she could speak again, "Thank you to the Recording Academy for creating these awards. Thank you to Norman Granz for believing in me. Thank you to everyone who's supported this music. And thank you to music itself for saving my life over and over again." The ovation continued as she left the stage, as she made her way back to her table, now needing Virginia's help to carry all 5 Grammys. Musicians from other tables came over to offer congratulations. The ceremony ended shortly after. As people filed out, Ella sat surrounded by 5 golden gramophones, still processing what had happened. "How does it feel?" Norman asked. "Surreal." Ella said, "Like I'm going to wake up and this will have been a dream." "It's real," Virginia said, touching one of the Grammys. "Very real." The next morning, newspapers across the country ran the story. Ella Fitzgerald sweeps first Grammy Awards. Jazz singer makes history with 5 wins. Photos of Ella holding multiple Grammys, smiling with genuine joy and disbelief. The music industry was stunned. Not that Ella had won, her talent was undeniable, but that the Recording Academy had chosen to make such a strong statement in its very first year. That they'd given one artist 5 awards, essentially saying, "This is the pinnacle. This is what we're celebrating." Some critics questioned whether it was appropriate to give so many awards to one person, wondered if the Academy should have spread recognition more evenly, but most understood. What had happened, the Grammy Awards had established their credibility by recognizing undeniable excellence. They'd set a standard. For Ella, the impact was profound. She'd been successful before that night. The Songbook series had made her wealthy and famous, but 5 Grammys at the inaugural ceremony elevated her to a different status entirely. She wasn't just a great singer anymore. She was the singer who'd made history on the night the music industry created its highest honor. The recognition opened new doors, more prestigious venues, higher fees, respect from corners of the industry that had sometimes dismissed jazz singers as niche performers. Ella Fitzgerald was now undeniably mainstream, undeniably important, undeniably legendary. But perhaps more importantly, those 5 Grammys validated everything she'd been doing, the songbook series that she'd initially resisted, the choice to sing standards straight rather than always improvising, the risk of being excellent in a way that might not be cutting edge but was undeniably beautiful. The Academy had said, "This matters, this is important, this is music at its finest." Years later, when the Grammy Awards had become a major televised event, when winning even one Grammy was considered a massive achievement, people would look back at that first ceremony in 1959 and marvel at Ella's sweep. 5 for 5, perfect record, a statement so definitive it would never be forgotten. Ella would go on to win 8 more Grammys over her career, bringing her total to 13. But those first 5 remained special, the ones that said, "We see you. We recognize you, you're not just good, you're the standard by which everyone else will be." Measured, she kept all 5 Grammys in her home, visible from where she practiced. Reminders that excellence doesn't go unnoticed forever, that patience and persistence and dedication to craft eventually get recognized, that the 17-year-old homeless girl who sang at the Apollo because she was too scared to dance had become someone whose artistry the entire music industry celebrated. The first Grammy Awards ceremony was held to honor the best recordings of 1958. Of all the music released that year, of all the performances by all the talented artists working, the Recording Academy looked at Ella Fitzgerald's work and said, "Yes, this, all of this." And on that May night in 1959, in a ballroom at the Beverly Hilton, Ella Fitzgerald learned what it felt like to have an entire industry acknowledge what she'd known privately for years. She'd dedicated her life to something worth doing, and she'd done it as well as anyone ever had. 5 golden gramophones, 5 validations, 5 times hearing her name called and walking to a stage to accept recognition she'd almost stopped hoping for. The night she expected nothing and received everything. The night the Recording Academy made a statement. The night Ella Fitzgerald went from being great to being undeniably, historically, officially legendary.